If you found yourself losing hours to something called gooning, I want to challenge the way you've probably been thinking about it. Most people assume it's simply about watching too much pornography, but I don't think that's the whole story. I think gooning may be one of the clearest examples of a dopamine hijack that I've ever seen, because this isn't just about sexual stimulation anymore. It's about what your brain is learning during hours of endless pursuit. And once you understand what your brain is actually practicing during those hours, the entire pattern begins to make sense. This episode is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. Learn how artificial stimulation miswires your brain and what you can do to rewire it back to purpose, intimacy, and connection. Go to drtrishleigh.com/book. Hi, I'm Dr. Trish Leigh, and welcome back to what I'm affectionately calling now Desire Rewire, the podcast. I am a cognitive neuroscientist, and I help people understand how repeated patterns change their brains. I want you to know that your brain is constantly adapting to what you repeatedly ask it to do, becoming more efficient at the patterns that you practice most often. That's neuroplasticity, baby. And gooning is a fascinating example of this very process. Most people think that dopamine is simply the chemical of pleasure, but dopamine is heavily involved in wanting, seeking, motivation, desire itself, anticipation, and of course, learning. It helps your brain recognize what deserves your attention and then directs your energy toward pursuing it. In essence, dopamine tells your brain, pay attention, this matters, remember this, do it again. That distinction changes everything when we're talking about gooning. Your reward system was designed to move through a natural cycle. You want something, so desire is created. You seek it by directing effort toward the thing that you want. Then you find it, and you experience the reward associated with all that effort that you put in. And eventually, the pursuit stops because satisfaction has been reached. So let's think about hunger. You become hungry, you find food, you eat, and eventually you feel satiated. The brain recognizes that the goal has been achieved, and then the pursuit naturally ends. But gooning changes the architecture of that cycle because instead of allowing the pursuit to resolve, you deliberately keep the brain suspended in anticipation. It goes like this. You search and find something stimulating. Arousal builds. You edge, taking that arousal toward heightened levels without completion, and then interrupt the process to preserve the anticipation. Before satisfaction arrives, you begin searching again for something that can ramp that arousal even higher. That might be another video or a new category delivering more novelty, a different fantasy creating greater intensity, another tab offering even more variety. Each new possibility creates another wave of anticipation, and the brain never fully leaves pursuit mode. This is where the neuroscience becomes incredibly interesting and honestly terrifying to me, because your brain isn't simply practicing sexual arousal. It is practicing the sequence of searching, anticipating, escalating, and seeking what comes next. The search itself can begin to feel rewarding because your reward system has become captivated by the possibility of what might be around the next corner. So just think about what happens during a long gooning session. You may scroll through dozens, sometimes hundreds of images and videos. You find something incredibly stimulating, but seconds later, your brain is already wondering, is there something even better? So you click again and continue searching for the stimulus that will somehow surpass the one that you just found. Eventually, you may not even be fully engaged with what you're watching anymore. The content has become secondary to the hunt itself. That is an incredibly high dopamine hijack. And here's where the conversation changes completely. If this were only about sexual desire, most sessions would be relatively short. Let's be honest, right? Most men aren't spending 4 hours gooning because of their sexual desire and it being high. Something much bigger is happening within the brain. What started as sexual stimulation can gradually become a learning strategy for changing your mental state. Stress fades into the background. Loneliness becomes quieter. Boredom disappears. Anxiety, it softens a bit. The work problem you haven't solved or the difficult conversation you don't want to have, it temporarily vanishes because your attention has become so narrowed, almost completely around the pursuit of the next stimulus. So now your brain is learning two incredibly powerful things at the same time. It is learning to become sexually aroused through endless novelty and escalation while simultaneously learning that this pattern can be used very efficiently to escape discomfort. And the brain remembers what changes its state. And this is why I think one of the biggest misconceptions about gooning is that it's purely a sexual problem. It's not. I don't think it is, because at its core, I think it's a learning problem. If you repeatedly ask your brain to search, compare, escalate, anticipate, and chase novelty for hours, it will become incredibly efficient at doing exactly that. The brain doesn't stop to ask whether the pattern that you're practicing is moving it toward the life that you want. It simply adapts to the repetition. Now here is the really tricky part. Along comes one day and you enter a real relationship and there's one person, one real body with a limited, albeit healthy and beautiful range of sexual intensity. There is one shared moment that requires vulnerability and presence, but also allows for genuine human connection. There's no search bar with endless tabs. You cannot switch categories the moment your attention wanders, and there is no algorithm delivering to you perfectly customized sexual novelty every 5 seconds. Real intimacy unfolds completely differently. It asks you to remain present with another human being long enough for connection to deepen. And a brain that has spent years practicing rapid pursuit may suddenly find that experience surprisingly too quiet. This is why so many men tell me, I love my partner, I'm attracted to her, so why am I struggling? The answer isn't necessarily that you've lost attraction. Your brain may simply have become extraordinarily well trained for a different experience. You have been practicing pursuit when healthy intimacy requires presence. Now, I want to take this one layer deeper. You ready? Why do these sessions so often happen when you're stressed, lonely, feeling rejected, exhausted, bored, or avoiding something you don't want to face? Once the brain learns that behavior can rapidly change your emotional state, it begins predicting that behavior the next time discomfort appears. Your brain recognizes the cue, and it anticipates the pattern that provided relief before, sometimes before you've consciously decided to watch pornography at all. That's why so many people tell me, I wasn't even planning on it. The behavior may have become automated. It automates itself. Your reward system recognized the cue long before your conscious mind fully caught up to it. And by the time you're 20 minutes into searching, you're asking yourself, and you're actually asking your prefrontal cortex to stop a train that has already made significant progress and has built significant momentum. That's why I don't love advice that simply says, have more discipline. Of course, discipline matters, but meaningful change often begins much earlier than the binge. It begins with recognizing the first domino. That domino shows up earlier. Maybe it's taking your phone into the bed. Maybe it's scrolling social media until something triggers the pursuit. Maybe it's feeling rejected or lonely or staying awake too late or finally being alone after a stressful day. If you can identify the cue that begins your sequence, you have a much better opportunity to interrupt the pattern before the dopamine hijack gains that momentum. This is where the hopeful part of the neuroscience begins, my favorite part, as you can imagine, because the same principle that helped wire this pattern into your brain can also help you unwire it out of your brain from that thing that hijacked it in the first place. So the next time the urge appears, look backward before you move forward. Ask yourself, what happened in the 10 minutes before the urge arrived? What were you feeling? What were you avoiding? Where were you? What is that first domino? Then physically interrupt the sequence. Leave the room. Put your phone somewhere you cannot mindlessly reach for it. Go outside, get a fresh breath of air. Move your body. Engage your attention or connect with another human being. You are beginning to break that automatic link that has been created between the cue and the behavior that your brain has very efficiently learned to expect. Every single time you interrupt that sequence, you create an opportunity, which is a word that I love. You create the opportunity to weaken the old pathway. You begin unwiring your brain from the pattern that hijacked it while giving your brain the opportunity to practice a healthier response. That, my friend, is how rewiring actually begins. But if you've been stuck in this cycle for years, I also want you to understand that sometimes behavioral change alone doesn't create the neurological shift that people are looking for. I work with men who have stopped watching pornography, sometimes at length, but still feel flat, distracted, disconnected, unmotivated, or sexually miswired. They stop the behavior, but their brain still doesn't feel the way they expected it to feel. That's precisely why I created a new program called Desire Rewire. In that program, I help people understand the patterns that may have hijacked their brain, identify how repeated stimulation may have created that miswire, and use brain-based strategies and advanced neuromodulation technology to support healthier brain function. The goal is to help you unlink from the patterns that have been driving you for a very long time, and of course to build healthier neural pathways and strengthen those pathways until they become the way that your brain naturally operates. And if you know me, this is not about shame or about morality. It's about neuroscience, and it's about helping your brain become capable of experiencing the rewards that make a meaningful life feel worth living again. Motivation, purpose, confidence, genuine connection, and of course, healthy intimacy with a real life honey. So if you want to learn more about that and to check out my new Desire Rewire, please visit drtrishleigh.com. The website has been reinvigorated with the new Desire Rewire programs, and you can explore the different paths that I've created to help you understand where your brain may be right now and what your next step might look like. Because in the end, Gooning isn't simply changing what you watch. It's changing what you repeatedly practice, and your brain becomes increasingly efficient at the patterns that you continue to reinforce. So perhaps the most important question isn't simply, how do I stop? The more important question is this: what am I training my brain to want, to desire? When you change what your brain practices, you begin changing what your brain pursues. And when those healthier pathways become strong enough, and when they become deeply enough wired through new ways of repetition, you, my friend, can become what I call hardwired for the life you actually want. So go try that. Go check out drtrishleigh.com, and please remember to control your brain, or in fact, it will control you. I'll see you next time.